Welcome, everyone. We very much appreciate your attending our November Assistive Technology Talk. I'm Tracy Strading, Director of the Michigan Assistive Technology Loan Funds, and I'm happy to introduce Dr. Jacqueline Kaufman. She's an Associate Professor in Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation at the University of Michigan and is a pediatric rehabilitation neuropsychologist serving children, adolescents, and young adults with a variety of acquired and congenital neurodevelopmental disorders. She is a proud and long-standing board member of MI-UCP. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Jack.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I'm delighted to be here. And as she said, I am a proud board member of MI-UCP for many years. And so it's always a privilege to be able to present at one of these events and AT talks. So what I'm going to do is share my screen, and I will be presenting today a talk related to transition planning. And I will be covering a lot of ground, but hopefully you'll find it useful and productive conversation. All right, so let me kick it off first with a title, because that's always important to do. So today I'll be talking about transition planning and choosing a deliberate pathway to optimize autonomy for individuals with disabilities. And I have a couple disclosures of affiliations, and probably more for their risk that they might have me representing them. So I'm a faculty at U of M. I'm, as mentioned, a proud board member of MI-UCP, and I am a co-founder and co-director of the Ann Arbor Rockets hockey program, which is a hockey program for kids and adults who have a variety of disabilities. I have no financial disclosures. I had hoped to say I had just won the lottery and that was a big financial disclosure. It turns out that's not how this is going to roll. So today is going to be a brief survey discussion about a very complicated topic. So there are things that for any slide we could do a deep dive, and we won't be doing that just in the interest of time and covering a lot of stuff. But I'm hoping that by covering a survey, that we could hit on a lot of things that may be relevant, and it can kick off the option to do a deeper dive after this. Learning objectives today include being able to identify patterns of unnecessary dependence for people with disabilities, describing strategies for breaking complex tasks into workable components, identifying key components of independent living skills, and important to the mechanism of this talk series, really thinking about how to consider high-tech and low-tech AT strategies in order to optimize independence. So I think a good starting point, if we're going to be talking about transition, is to have a good sense of what it is we're talking about. So transition is the process or a period of changing from one state or condition to another. So when we talk about transition planning, we're not talking about this moment in time. Nothing happens just in a moment. It's a process and a period of changing from one state or place to another. Transition is a dynamic process, and it's on a continuum. So it's not like some switch that you flip. I think a lot of things that we deal with transition planning, like the school's an obvious place where, this starts at age this, and this is the very specific point we do this. It has a sort of artificial binary quality to it, as if it's a switch. And I think probably everyone on this talk knows that that's really not how this works. We talk about transition planning often in reference to this change from our adolescence to young adulthood, but I do want to point out that there are a lot of natural transition points that happen as we age. In our early years, in our first 18 years, we have a lot of transition points. And in fact, most of the transition periods we go through happen in our first 18 years. So when we're an infant moving into toddlerhood, that's a big shift. There's this sort of like fundamental obvious difference between a person who's an infant and a toddler. And then the same thing happens going into early childhood. So those, starting in early grade school. And then another one as we're looking at middle childhood, so those junior high or tween years that everybody really loves. And then adolescence is another one. And you could really, when you take a minute and think about the needs, the independence and skills of people in these different stages, it really looks very different. And these are massive shifts that happen in our independence and our understanding and our problem solving. But we do have similar kinds of shifts that happen when we're adults too. And it's interesting that we have this compression of changes that happen when we're younger that get compressed into about 18 years, when really like 50 to 79 years of our lives are spent in very few transitions. But we do have them. We have that transition from early adulthood into middle adulthood into our more later years, senior years. So we're going to talk a little bit today about this idea of transitioning with a disability. So it's important to remember that transition talk isn't just about people with disabilities. Everybody has transition planning they do. We're specifically talking about transitioning with a disability. And there's added factors on the plate of people that need a little extra care and attention if you're going through these life transition points and you have disability. So concretely, we may have additional medical needs. So we may have to think about medical transition planning. We may have physical needs. So, thinking about moving into our first apartment versus moving into our first apartment when we have mobility devices, we have bowel and bladder needs, we have seizure management. Do we need a ramp? So it's the same transition point, but there are nuances to what it looks like. We may have cognitive needs. So if there's a developmental delay or attention concerns, intellectual disability, or maybe with certain conditions, particularly for older years, where we may have fluctuating cognition related to dementia or brain tumor or things like this, those are different kinds of cognitive needs. As we age, we also have unique social needs, including things like sexual and reproductive needs that we have to think about with transitioning. There are academic and vocational needs. And then we may have to be a little more deliberate about our independent living needs. And I think, for transitioning into adulthood, we all should be, as we transition into adulthood, talking about things like power of attorney. I think, everyone should have a medical directive. Everyone should have a power of attorney. I think that this is just a good idea for any human moving about. I personally have one. I've had one for years because I just think that that's a good idea. But it becomes more complicated when we start saying, well, is it power of attorney that's a good idea? Should we talk about a conservatorship, guardianship, partial guardianship, supported decision-making? We'll talk more about that a little bit later. So I want to use this grid to sort of describe what's unique about having a transition with a disability. And I love, this is an older grid by Tarazi, excuse me, and it's just a really smart way to think about the needs. So on the top, you can see you may be a person who has typical self-care demands or atypical self-care demands. You may be on the left, you can see be a person who has age-appropriate executive functioning and thinking skills, or you may be a person who has executive dysfunction and thinking skills. So if we look at the first combination, we can see typical self-care demands and age-appropriate executive functioning. So this would be, if we're thinking about the transition into young adulthood, this would be a typically developing child making that transition. The next combination may be atypical self-care demands and age-appropriate executive functioning. So maybe somebody who has a spinal cord injury, or they have diabetes and they don't have any cognitive concerns. So they have an atypical care need. They need to manage their insulin. They have a wheelchair for mobility. They may have to cath in order to manage their bowel and bladder. But cognitively, they're dealing with those demands independently. The next combo may be typical self-care demands, but the presence of executive dysfunctioning. So maybe a person who has a traumatic brain injury or a person who has attention deficit disorder, they have no unusual physical requirements, but their cognitive ability to embark on taking care of those typical requirements might be complex. And then I think when you have this combo of atypical self-care demands and a risk of cognitive concern, which is a lot of people who have neurodevelopmental disabilities, now this is a unique combination. And something that I think of might be a person who has myelomeningocele or spina bifida with a shunted hydrocephalus. They may have cognitive concerns, they may have mobility concerns, they may have caffeine requirements. So now we're asking a person who has a lot of added demands on their plate, more than what is expected of other people, more than what's expected of their peers. They're expected to take care of those with less cognitive resources. And that's what makes transition planning really challenging and different and unique for individuals with complex neurodevelopmental disabilities. So it kind of informs some of these outcomes here, that hitting milestones with disabilities seems to be different than hitting milestones without a disability. Young adults with disabilities are around 20 to 40% less successful in achieving common young adult milestones within their 20s and 30s. And one that really always bums me out is this includes things like becoming a parent, something that a lot of people want to do, and having a disability shouldn't be the thing that gets in the way of something like that. People who have high incidence disabilities, and I'll think of something like a learning disability or ADHD, are more likely to attain milestones within that young adult time frame. Conversely, there are greater risks associated with cognitive impairments compared to physical impairments. So someone, say, who has a spinal cord injury and uses a wheelchair for their mobility may have greater ease in achieving some of these young adult milestones than a person, say, who has an intellectual disability. We see that high school graduation rates among individuals with disabilities isn't where we would like it to be. So with a diploma, it's around, close to 70%. Without a disability, it's more like 86%. Some states do better, and you can see it is, I think it's easy to start making assumptions about which states would be the ones that have the problems, but it doesn't always line up with states that are consistently stronger in social services. So if you look and see, Arkansas, Kansas, New Jersey, Texas tend to be the states that do better with diplomas for individuals with disabilities. It's interesting to tease apart perhaps why that is. One of the nice trends is that overall graduation rates with diplomas are improving. The trend is moving upwards. So my slide from years ago that had these rates was lower, like in the low 60s. So it's bumping up. Around 14% finished with a certificate of completion. And sadly, we've got about a 20% dropout rate for people with disabilities, which is an alarmingly high number. Without disabilities, it's not terrific, but it's 8, much better. So when we think about transition planning, the time to start is early. So a very common thing that I'll hear when I attend a school meeting is, it's not time to start that yet. We start transition planning at age whatever. That's sort of a funny way to think about transition planning, because in typically developing individuals, transition planning starts on the first day of life. So when we parent, the way to think about it is, if you are doing an optimal job, you're putting yourself out of a job. When we teach, we're putting ourselves out of a job. We're saying that when we're done with this person, they should need us less and less. And so the goal of working with a child to move them into independence is you put yourself out of a job. So if that's truly the case, it's not like you're not working for 14 years and then suddenly you start parenting. You're working towards moving this person into independence from the very first day of life. So who are the people blocking these opportunities for kids, young adults with disabilities to grow, to transition and start having opportunities to grow into independence? And I would say we are all culpable for that. So I think, you know, and this isn't a finger point. A lot of it has to do with regulatory stuff and, you know, structural and systemic things that make it tough. But schools, I think the medical establishment does a pretty crummy job with helping with this, and I'm in the medical establishment, so I feel I'm in a position to say it. And I think parents inadvertently sabotage transition planning, and it's often in service of keeping kids safe. But it's a common problem, and usually parents know that if we talk about it honestly. And I think just societally, we do a lot of things to overhelp and provide opportunities for independence. One of the things that's critical is knowing what are adaptive living skills, what's adaptive behavior, what's independence. If we know what those things are and can name it, we can start moving people towards it. Because I think often the lack of a roadmap is what gets in the way. So let's pull away a piece of that barriers and describe these. So activities of daily living are very, very limited and basic. They don't involve much. So bathing, dressing, eating, transferring, so moving from one space to another, and toileting. These are activities of daily living. Now, some will say, like as an example, you'll see bathing, the ability to clean and groom oneself. I have an asterisk there because what does by oneself mean? I would argue that you may be able to say you're independent in your daily living skill of bathing yourself if you can articulate to another what they need to do to assist you with that task. You then could describe yourself as independent if you can fully articulate the need to get it done. Now, someone else would say I'm wrong. So this isn't an agreed upon thing across the board, but I'm going to posit that argument here, that is a form of independence and calling it by oneself. The other thing to think about in this is adaptive behavior. So you can have, excuse me, your overall sort of global measurement of your adaptive behavior, and it's comprised of a couple domains. One is a conceptual independence, you have practical independence, and you have social independence. So when we think about conceptual independence, we're thinking about your communication skills, your functional academics, your self-direction. If I'm thinking about practical independence, it's more the practical stuff. And can I use community? How do I do with my home living skills? Do I have capacity to manage health and safety? Do I know my self-care skills? And a lot of that are those daily living skills. And then a social independence, and it's things like our leisure and our social skills. Work is under this, but it's kind of its own animal. And oftentimes the first thing that I get from people is, I don't even know where to start. This is very overwhelming and I don't even know where to start. The truth of it is, I think the reason it feels overwhelming to start is because everybody's looking at the big picture. But the reality is most of the demands we face day to day are very routine and very practiced and not all that complicated. So I have chosen in my job to pick a complicated job that has complicated day-to-day things I do, but I don't have to have that job. And that job has nothing to do with my independent living skills. That's my job. My independent living skills so far today were I woke up, I take a shower, I fed myself breakfast, and I used the toilet. Those were my independent living skills today. I have had the same independent living skills every day this week. They didn't change. They were stable. I didn't have to learn anything new. I didn't have to do anything complicated beyond those things. That was it. So it's important to remember when we're talking about those sort of basic independent living skills, don't talk about all the other stuff. That's getting into the weeds too much, actually. We're just focusing on that. It actually doesn't change much, and it is not that complicated if you can sort out a system to make it work. So a big thing is saying, for this individual I'm working with, where are they at on those most core basic skills? There are plenty of people in this world who have no disability, who struggle with these. Often it's because of cognitive or behavioral issues. And so this isn't unique to people with disabilities, that these could be hard. Sometimes there are physical barriers to getting these things done, but that doesn't mean we can't be thinking about, could this person articulate how to have someone else help them? Or for the purposes of this talk, importantly, are there assistive technology strategies that could bolster my ability to do these things? So the other thing to bear in mind is most daily living activities are pretty low risk. So as a concrete example with my, going to the toilet and grooming and all this, I have to go every day to the toilet, but let's say I don't brush my teeth one day. I mean, it's not great, but nobody's going to die because they didn't brush their teeth one day. So if someone's not perfect exactly as you would do it, is it the end of the world? Probably not. More than likely not. If you don't put your clothes on and stay in your pajamas all day, are you going to die? No, not the end of the world. You want someone to dress and you want them to do work. But again, that doesn't mean someone couldn't be pretty independent, and maybe they're living a life that looks a little different than you're hoping, but that doesn't mean they can't be independent. So the other thing to bear in mind is most activities can be broken down into a series of instructions and steps accomplished by the individual, even if they have a lot of trouble. And a first step is stopping the reminding and telling of what someone should do, and find a way to see what do I have to do to get this person to remember, to manage, or to check it off their list. You want to be very transparent what you're doing, because the transparency helps that person learn. Well, the next question would be, how do I know what this person needs to be taught? There's all these things. How would I know what this person needs to be taught? Well, I would argue that the data will reveal themselves if you let them. So just pick 2 to 3 activities for the week. Start there. I always say, just don't go nuts, because you're going to drive yourself nuts and you're going to drive the other person nuts. Just pick 2 to 3 things. And you want to track success without judgment. And you want to say, we're going to have this person try to brush their teeth this week. That's what we're doing. We are going to work on brushing our teeth this week. And we're going to see, can they do it? We're going to track success. Did it happen? We're doing it without judgment. We're doing it to gather data, because the data will reveal where the problems are. And we're going to systematically support the weak points. Okay, well, they didn't brush their teeth. Well, what happens if I put a note up that says brush your teeth? What happens if I set an alarm that says brush your teeth? What happens if I leave a toothbrush out with some toothpaste on it on the counter when I know the person's going to be there? You're going to start trying some things out. You want to avoid things like defaulting to go brush your teeth, because then the person isn't doing it independently. You want to see where is the special sauce for that person, where they do it on their own and you pull away. So with evidence of capacity and structure, you pull back as a parent, as a guardian, as a spouse, as a care partner, and you move to this standby assist model with prompting, not directing. And you even can use these sort of supportive comments that help build the person's metacognitive thinking skills. So instead of telling them, you may say, if they grab their toothbrush and start brushing and they didn't have toothpaste on, you may say, one option is to say, put toothbrush on that, toothpaste on that. So that doesn't give them the skill of learning how to think strategically. You may instead say, I saw you were brushing your teeth, but it didn't look like there was anything that you were using to clean your teeth. I wonder what you could do about that. You're giving the thinking prompt instead of the answer. This is the tool we give, and we do this all the time with typically developing kids. We let them muddle around a little bit and get to the decision. And for really unclear reasons, when someone has a disability, that somehow goes out the window, and we feel often a need to step in and resolve. We want to give individuals with disabilities just the same equal opportunity to muddle and to struggle a little bit and see, with just the right amount of data, can I arrive at that destination on my own? And we want to reinforce successes strategically so that when we see it's good, say, I really like how you put toothpaste on there. It feels like your teeth are going to be cleaner this time. And really giving the prompts of this thing you just did, that was it. That was exactly right. So where does AT fit into all this? Assistive technology is any item you could use to increase and improve or maintain the functional capacities of the person that you're working with. So usually we talk about this with disability, but that's really not the way to do it, because universally AT is good for everyone. So, assistive technology is something all people use, and we just want you to, be thinking about how to recognize it in everyday life. When I think about AT, I am just as guilty of this. Often my head goes to very fancy and expensive and shiny things, but assistive technology often in its best form is low tech or no tech. I think the other error we make is we often think, oh, if it's assistive technology, there has to be an occupational therapist and a referral and lots of specialists and doctors and rehab engineers, and that's just not the case. So here are some examples of assistive technology that I recommend often or am involved in for research. So this is high tech and mid tech. You can see there's an example of a talker on there. So in an augmentative communication device, there's phone apps for remembering when to take your medication. The gentleman in the wheelchair is using an eye gaze to help with using an assistive tech communication device. There's dictation software. I think a lot of us use that. There's mobile magnifiers for if you have vision difficulties. Immersive e-readers have brought access to reading for people for lots of reasons: vision problems, dyslexia, attention problems, people who need to hear while they're reading it, just to get it twice. There's an example of a live scribe pen, which is, I think, great for people who need to take fewer notes but need to be able to go back and listen to things later. Here's an example of something very advanced like brain-computer interface. I mean, this is the highest level of technology. So these are high-end, high-tech. But there's also low-end and no-tech. So common lower tech strategies may be things like button and switches. I've got a whole bunch of switch devices there. Sometimes they're connected to high-end high-tech devices. And sometimes, like you can see, here's a picture of, there's 4 choices for snacks. Now I'm going to give a plug for something important to do, which is here there's 4 choices for snacks and they all look like good snacks to me. Like you can't go wrong with any of those. This is one of the mistakes we make when we're pushing people towards independent living, is when people have difficulty with communication and movement, we only offer them good choices. This means they are not learning how to make a mistake, because if you never make a bad choice, you don't have a bad consequence. So when you have multiple choices like that, in order to optimize independence and use technology well, you want to make sure instead of cookies, there's a picture of a rock or a dirty rag there. And if the person picks that, that's what they get. So that people really learn clearly, my choices mean something, my autonomy comes from my choices, and this technology is the way I access my independence, and my choices mean something through this technology. There are also lower tech things like finger grips for pencils, calculators, Post-it notes. My house has Post-it notes everywhere because I have a terrible memory. So, doesn't get cheaper than that at the dollar store. Slant boards for kids and adults. And then there's even a picture exchange communication system here, or PECs. So this is the low-tech version of a high-tech talker. And for many, this actually works better than the talker. It just is, it's sometimes lower tech is better. So now let's go back to what we were talking about and apply it. If we're thinking about getting ready in the morning, we can use medium or high tech things. So, if you have a hearing impairment, maybe you need a smart shaker alarm to wake you up in the morning, or the Moshi voice interactive alarm is hands-free. So if you have movement difficulties, it's a gorgeous looking clock for your room. And it is turned on and off by voice command. Maybe by the time you go downstairs or upstairs, you need a chairlift to get to where you're going to make your transfer. And downstairs waiting for you is your PRIA medication dispenser because you have cognitive difficulties and can't keep track of how to get your medication out. So far in all of this, somebody who has a lot of needs doesn't need another person, doesn't need somebody to tell them what to do. They just need access through technology. And then what's going to happen with the day? Well, maybe you need a digital dated planner with hyperlinks and, planners that talk to you. There's a lot of different ways to do this. And then there's the low tech way. So everything that you can think of, there's going to be a high tech and a low tech. So in this model, I'm thinking for a kid, for example, or a young adult who's moving into their first apartment with a neurodevelopmental disability and you want to make sure they can get out the door. Maybe you go to Joann Fabrics or Michael's and get a felt board and put some Velcro on it. And you say, these are the things you have to do. When you're done, you put them in the done section. And then you'll know if they're all on the bottom that it's time, you've done all of these things. It's time to say you're done and it's time to go. And for people who need more reinforcement, you can say, if they're all done, you can get a reward. And at the end of the week, if you've got 20 rewards, then we're going to do something fun. We're going to see a movie. We're going to do something that you want to do so that this becomes a highly motivating assistive technology strategy. How else can we use this strategy? Well, we can say for taking pills, we already saw one version, but there are automatic pill reminders on phones. We have timed pill boxes that will pop up. So if part of your transition is into adulthood and you live alone and you're developing cognitive decline related to dementia or stroke, there are pill devices that will pop open in a timed fashion and start alerting to tell you it's time to take it. If you have someone come in once a week and fill your pills for you, you can be really independent and stay in your home and be independent with your living and maintain your autonomy while making sure that you're safe with your medication. You can do things like with laundry, take pictures of the different kinds of clothes that go in this basket for light and this basket for darks, and then take photos of what the laundry settings are and put those inside different sheet protectors and tape them over the washer dryer. The person that we're talking about doesn't have to know how to do the laundry. They don't have to figure anything out. They have to know to go to the place where the assistive technology is and to reference it. And then they can live independently doing laundry. Same with preparing a sandwich. There's so many things. And often in the conversations I have with families, they'll say, there's no way they could ever do laundry. And I ask, could they follow a picture of the settings? Could they do that? And they say, well, yeah, they could do that, but they would never do it on their own. Well, they don't have to worry about it because you'll have the pictures there ready to go. And it's only when you start having this shift in how you think about it that you start to think, oh, you know what, this person could be independent. We need to use resources, either high or low tech resources, to create an environment for success. Now, with laundry, it's a great example. You also want to pull out high risk things that are going to put a foil in your system. So if you have a person that you're counting on this kind of laundry system, don't get them red socks. That's a downfall for a lot of us, a red sock. But be very strategic that you create the environment for success to happen. So let's think about this in an applied setting for school, for someone who is young, they're school age, and let's say they have a LEAF project. A project like this is very complicated, but it doesn't mean a person with cognitive difficulties can't do it, and that we can't give them the tools of how you break down a complicated task so that when you are older, you have practice breaking down tasks so that you can be independent. If you said to a person with a complex neurodevelopmental disability, do your LEAF project, here's the assignment, it probably won't get done. But if you say, the first step is you need to go to the library and get a book about leaves. And when you're done, you come back to me and I'll give you the next step. The next step is you're going to gather the leaves. And you give them each step incrementally. Many people with pretty significant disabilities could do this task as long as they're getting it in chunks. So just even the process of breaking things down creates a lot of access for a lot of people. Now, you want to be transparent about the help you're giving. And I think this is another downfall that we have: schools, parents, healthcare providers, society. We try to hide the help we're giving. And we would never do this for typically developing kids. When kids get things wrong on tests, we mark it wrong with a big red X and they get a D. I see more kids in developmental programming in school who get A+ in everything, and they're on the honor roll, and their aide did all of the work for them. That's nonsense. It doesn't make an ounce of sense, and it's helping nobody. And all it does is cause confusion for the kid and the parent because they don't know what they're dealing with. So we have to stop that. You want to right-size the education and right-size the skill demand to be an accessible one, but give honest feedback about how it went. So autonomy comes from knowing your status. If you're operating under a false pretense, there's no way you can develop autonomy because it's like a shifting landscape and it's a house of cards. So you can't ask for help if you don't know you need help. If the help is secretly given to you, you don't have the autonomy to ask for it later. So it is a condescending thing we do to people with disabilities. And we have to stop and remember that while it was always well-intended, it's actually harmful to do it. So let's think about an older example of a person who is an adult who maybe develops a disability in adulthood. So a 46-year-old woman diagnosed with multiple sclerosis who's had a lot of trouble navigating carrying in groceries after a big shopping trip because she has leg weakness and balance problems, and her partner is at work midday. So she comes home. It's the same process. It doesn't matter. So you break it into component parts. What is the demand in front of you? What are the elements you could do on your own? Could you make lots of small trips? Is that something you could do? Could you load all of the things on a roller cart in the garage? Could you knock on a neighbor's door? So what are the elements you could do on your own? And what are the cost benefits of doing those tasks? So could you do it on your own, but then you're going to be whipped the rest of the day? Does it mean you're going to have a decline in your function? What tools or resources do you have? And then you want to document it. So today I came home with too many groceries. My leg was weak, my balance was off, and my arms felt good. So I went to the garage and I got the old office chair that we had out there for the garbage, and I loaded all of the soda cans onto it and I pushed it to the door. And then I took each of the cans out one by one so I didn't have to lift anything heavy. Write it down, because maybe the next time you will only buy soda cans when you go to the store, because that seemed to be the thing that took it out of you. And you will make sure that you have at the driveway a cart ready to go. You want to be transparent about the help you require. Did you need another person? Did you need technology? You have to know what you need help with so that you can ask for help. So for young adult transitions, after we've done this assessment of function, now's the time to really start having some important and complicated conversations. So by age 16, you should really be in the thick of conversations about turning 18. Often people start this conversation when they're 17 and a half, and it gets tricky. I say you should be starting these conversations when someone's 12, 13, 14. You should really start talking about it, because all kids, people are asking them, what are you going to be when you grow up? What are you going to do? Where do you think you want to go to school, or where do you want to live? Are you going to be married? We do this. So there's no reason we shouldn't do it with individuals who have disabilities. Avoid getting caught up in dire threats. I've heard people come in panic that school told me that I needed a guardian now. That's crazy. You want to honor your family's cultural, racial, and religious beliefs about caring for family members when you're having these conversations. If you come from a cultural, racial, or religious background that says, in our culture, in our religion, in our race, we do this, listen to that and have that conversation with the people you're working with the school, with healthcare providers, with attorneys. Make sure that you honor that, because that's part of who you are. And it needs to be recognized, because that will be a relevant factor in how it plays out for you. And recognize that your financial and local resource limitations are real and they do influence. So you may have people telling you, oh, all you have to do is this. Is that a person who understands that you maybe don't have great financial resources, or you're in a weird space in the middle class where you don't qualify for anything, but you don't make enough? So you want to be honest and real with yourself about this, and be real and honest with the people you're working with, and get ready to really think out of the box. This is like 500 lectures in and of itself, and I'm going to use one slide, but I'm going to try and be really clear and tip my hat to my my tremendous biases on the topics of this slide. So there are a lot of options for when a person turns 18, or if they struggle to take care of themselves and their own needs. The most common thing to happen is, if a person has a significant disability, is that people start queuing up and saying, you need to get going on getting guardianship in place. So I would argue that very few people need guardians. There are plenty of people who need guardians, but they are far and few between. Most people don't need a guardian. There are people who need pieces of guardianship, and we live in a state where partial guardianship is an option. It is not used enough, but it is. Not all states have this. So in Michigan, it's wonderful that this is an option. And I would say often, if guardianship is needed, it can often be partial. The thing about guardianship to remember is, guardianship is saying this person does not have the autonomy to make their decisions. It is, I'm saying the quiet part out loud, because it's kind of a gross thing when you think about that. That's the decision point you're being forced into when you say we're deciding about guardianship. It isn't just about making choices. It's literally about autonomy. And sometimes it is really the space where that is the best choice. It's most important, though, to arrive there after very thoughtful consideration, and to think through, if this person does need pieces of their autonomy taken for the greater good of their safety, for their happiness, for their quality of life, then does it have to be complete, plenary, absolute? Or can it be part? Are there just pieces that need done? So I'm going to give you a concrete example of medical stuff. Like, does the person need full medical guardianship? Or is it that for big decisions, but like, let's say they don't want to use a stinky cream for an itchy rash, that they could make that decision? They have the right to be miserable. They have the right to make bad choices. They have the right to be, I make bad choices all the time. There's no reason a person with a developmental disability shouldn't have the right to make loads of awful life decisions, just like everybody else. So it's important to really think about that consideration and be thoughtful. All of the slides up to now are ways you can have data gathered about where you're at. So if you do this front work, this decision actually is really informed and feels a lot better, and doesn't feel so arbitrary about whether you need that. Power of attorney is a wonderful way to get around guardianship when you really don't need guardianship. So power of attorney says, this person is someone I assign to be able to speak on my behalf. Often, in many families and in many arrangements, that's really what's happening in guardianship with the way it got arranged. And it could be held under power of attorney. You can have it for medical, for financial. It's about the conversation. It's about, how are we setting this up? And so if you set it up well, it's going to afford you the same help, the same support. Conservatorship is for when money is the main thing. And conservators can be family members. They can be somebody outside of the family. You can pay somebody to manage finances. So there's a lot of ways to do this. The process can be really easy or it can be really complicated. And a lot of it depends on whether everyone's on the same page or not. But this should rarely, if ever, be a permanent arrangement because people change. You know, if a 20-year-old you is probably very different than 25-year-old and very different from 30-year-old you. People with developmental and physical disabilities are going through life development changes just the same. And so checking in on these things should happen with regularity. And when is a good age to get the ball rolling on this? Yesterday. It all starts with a conversation, and all of this assistive technology and supportive strategizing is the conversation. And that's why I say you should be transparent, because if you're transparent while you're doing it, you're actually having conversations about power of attorney, guardianship, partial guardianship, conservatorship. You're having those conversations through the process. So there isn't any magical thinking with this. You want to work with an attorney no matter, you know, like if you're doing any of these things, you want to work with an attorney who knows about special needs trust, things like that. And you should have a vision. You as a family and the individual with a disability should come prepared with a life vision, kind of a vision mission statement about their future. Where are you going? Who do you want to be? How do you want this to look? How can this person be the most independent? And you want to be realistic. So often I'll hear people say, well, we have to have guardianship to protect them. I have never seen a person trying to steal money from a vulnerable person ask if they have a guardian or not. Nobody is pinning guardianship papers to somebody does not put a dome of safety around them. It's not about guardianship or power of attorney. It's about the conversations and planning you do that are actually the safety creators. So guardianship is a piece of paper. It makes undoing, you know, financial things easier if something goes awry without it. But the reality is there isn't a dome of safety that comes with it. So you don't want to say, oh, we'll be fine, we're just going to get a guardianship. That's not going to do you any good. You'll be fine because you had the conversations and you planned and were thoughtful going in. And again, you just want to revise. Each time that things go south, don't panic, just revise, think back, try again, and come up with a new strategy that works for the person that you're working with now. Sorry, it's dry in my office. Now, there is something called supported decision-making. Michigan is not a supported decision-making state. There are currently, I think, 8 states, the last time I checked. But there are initiatives in Michigan to try to move this forward, talk with your legislators. The supported decision-making is a model where the person selects trusted people to serve as supporters who are in agreement to help the person understand, consider, and communicate their decisions. So they're kind of like a panel of informants to help bring this person up to speed on the things they would need to know to make good decisions. And by good, I don't mean smart decisions, because a decision to do something stupid is a valid decision. It's an informed decision. So let's say I want to go on a crazy, like, drunken bender and spend lots of money and buy a gazillion lottery tickets. If my supported decision-making team makes me aware of what are the consequences of that and I understand them, I can still do that. That's a good decision because it was informed. It's probably going to have some negative outcomes for me, but that's my right as a human to make bad decisions. The key here is that you had an good informed decision that you were making. This is a strength model. You're looking at what does the person need, what would get them informed. There's a safety in it because multiple people reduces the risk of abuse or manipulation, where if there's one person, you know, if you have one guardian, you have one person, there's more of a risk of manipulation. When you have a panel of people, you have less risk of that manipulation. So there are different ways to think about these next steps that we face, like higher education. So in terms of planning for that, students with physical or developmental disabilities have to plan for post-high school or intermediate school districts. So colleges, for people who are college bound, have disability offices. You can get extra time, copies of lecture notes, quiet space, scribes. For kids who need more training programs, there are specialized training. So like MCTI in Michigan, there's apprenticeships, other programs. And a lot of schools are starting to develop special programming for students who have significant neurodevelopmental disabilities that focus more on the social and independent living arm of the college experience. It's smart for colleges to do this. It's good business. Often these are not diploma associated programs, but they're really great and worth looking at, so that that independent college experience from a social end is something that young adults can experience. So when we're thinking about middle school and high school version of these students, we want to think about assistive technology that grows them into this higher ed space. So like I, for example, will say, let's get dictation software on board, a live scribe recordable pen, and a tablet in middle school. So they have all of middle school and all of high school to practice using it, so that they're efficient with it by the time they get to post-secondary school. So often I'll hear from schools things like, well, we start that kind of assistive technology when they're older. I say, nope, back it up. Always start as early as possible, because that will help them use it better when they do need it. We also know that there are predictors of competitive employment with a disability. So working in high school, common model is I need my kid to focus on their schoolwork, not work, because it's harder for them. You may want to rethink that, because working in high school actually is a better predictor of them getting work after high school. Having computer skills, your expectations of a parent that after high school they will work is an exceptionally high predictor of employment. Not surprisingly, having an arrest record is a negative predictor of employment. So try not to get arrested. There's some evidence of progress in recent years where we see a diminishing income disparity gap. And we want to help our young adults learn about self-advocacy for accommodations in the workplace. The place to practice that is at the IEP. Kids should sit in on their IEPs, at least for part of it, so that they can start saying, I need this. This is what would be helpful. I need this kind of technology to be successful. And then we want people to get to work. Obviously, once somebody with a neurodevelopmental disabilities through that initial period of education, what happens next? Well, college is an option, but Michigan, we have education at 26 here when appropriate. Young adult programs focus on a lot of different things, sometimes education, sometimes life skills. Like I said, we've got our Voc Tech programs. You want to get creative with what's a good fit. And you don't want to lie to your kids. So I recently saw somebody where the young adult wanted to be a construction worker, and they had a very significant physical disability. And everybody was saying to them, it was in the IEP, mom and dad were talking about it, that they were going to be a construction worker. And I said, let's stop this. Let's stop this. This person is not going to be a construction worker. Let's find out what it is about construction they like and talk about that. It's a gift that you give someone, because any other child would have been told much earlier, that's not going to work out for you. I was told very early that I was not going to be a WNBA player. I am short and not athletic. I got a lot of feedback about that. I didn't make the team when I tried out. That's great feedback. I didn't like it at the time. That hurt my feelings, but what it does is it gives me corrective action. So if I really liked basketball, I guess I could have been the manager of the team. I could have found out where is the place I fit based on my interests and skills. But if no one would have told me otherwise, I could have put a lot of energy into something that wasn't going to happen, and wasting time, I could have been sorting out what would have. So we really have to get away from this. You can be anything you want to be, because I think we all know that's not true for typically developing kids. We can do a lot of things, and we can be lots of things, and amazing, amazing things. but not everything is available to every person. We all have strengths and weaknesses, and the trick to optimizing independence is being honest about what those strengths and weaknesses are. So, you know, for employment, there are laws that protect people with disabilities from discrimination. It's true, and they are broken every day. All the laws in the world don't help if you can't physically access things. People don't get hired when they have visible disabilities. So the law is the law, but we have to be honest about that reality. But there are gateway programs for and service agencies that can help. And I have highlighted our amazing MI-UCP that I hope people will use. And the final thing I'm going to just really briefly talk on, because I would be remiss if I didn't, as a healthcare provider, is we all as humans make medical transitions too. So, you know, this is an important part of transition planning, particularly if you have complex healthcare needs. So in general, kids should be seen by family providers or pediatricians, and adults should be followed by family providers or general internists. So unless you are being followed by a family medicine doctor, or a doctor who specializes in lifespan and treats families, all children should transition to adult providers. If you're in family medicine, your pediatric care should transition to adult care with your provider. And healthcare transition is the process, again, it's a process of changing from pediatric to adult models of care. And the goal is to improve the ability of the person to manage their own health care, you know, pull away from mom and dad handling it, and then making sure they're getting adult-centered care. And then health self-management is like, how are you handling your chronic healthcare needs? So why is it so hard for this to happen? Well, I would say oftentimes people don't want to change. You know, you've been seeing the same doctor all this time. I didn't want to change for my pediatrician, you know, so I get it. But they're afraid, they're not comfortable with changing. They don't want to listen to adult demands. Medical providers often don't want to give up their patients if they're patients with disabilities, because they know what's on the other side in adult care. Or there's no adult to receive them, no adult provider to receive them. I constantly am hearing from people and dealing with a person who transitions people over. There's no adult provider to take me. They don't know how to deal with disabilities. And then assumptions by providers that adults with disabilities don't have the same preventative needs, like, oh, this person with spina bifida would never use drugs, so I'm not going to ask them. Of course, people with spina bifida use drugs. This person has a low IQ, so we're not going to talk about sex or LGBTQ or sexually transmitted disease. Well, people with low IQ have lots of sex, so all of it should be talked about. You know, everybody, all the things you talk about with adult stuff, colonoscopy is a whole thing. So you need adult-centered care. There's also a false idea that people with disabilities are perpetual children, and that's that obviously needs to be broken with that move to adult care. And then I think the biggest thing is it's a sneak attack. Like, nobody's ready for kids to grow up, and all people go through this, disability or no, that you're not, it happens quickly. So we just don't plan quickly enough. So don't forget, when you're dealing with all of these transition ideas, to be sure to talk about medical transition planning. So in closing, transition planning is a lifelong process. The goal is to shift towards optimized independence. And we can do this with careful, honest, and deliberate planning. We can find a path to the clearest picture of what supports that individual's needs to be as independent as they can be. And assistive technology is evolving, and there's tremendous supports for people with disabilities, and it can help increase the number of people who live independently, or what I call independently with support. You know, sometimes you can have a person just pop in a couple days a week and otherwise live independently with some of this technology. And assistive tech doesn't have to be fancy to be helpful. It's using it creatively and intermingling high tech, low tech to just maximize who you are and how you live independently. And with that, I will stop and remind anybody who's on this probably has a complex life. Make sure you take care of yourself. And in the stress of the day, always take time to breathe, find your feet on the ground, and take care of yourself. And I have my picture of holding a baby goat in Nepal as my reminder always to breathe. So with that, I will stop sharing and open it up to any questions with our remaining time.
Does anyone have a question? You can you can raise your hand, or you can type the question in either the chat or the Q&A, whichever you prefer. But I was so blown away. I'm sure people have questions. It takes a minute to get through the technology piece, and hope it'll alert me here if you raise your hand. There's one. Okay. Okay, Claire, go ahead with your question.
I was just going to say, I was going to comment, mine says chat disabled, but I was just going to say, this was a really great talk and really great information, and I just really appreciate it. So no question, just thank you.
Thank you so much.
I have a 17-year-old, so all this is very right in my face right now. So
you got this. Like you so have this.
Thank you.
Right, it looks like Corbett, if you want to go ahead with your question. Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, is there any place where the slide presentation is available for to download or to get the information that was on it?
Yes, if you send an email, there's my email address is in the chat. Just send an email to my email address and I will send you a copy of it. It will also load to our YouTube channel, usually within a couple of weeks. So you should be able to watch it again as well if you'd like.
Okay. Just so you know, there's nothing in the chat, so it's disabled right now.
Okay, I'll work on fixing that. And well, thank you for letting me know that, Corbett. I'm not sure what's happening with that, but I'll check on it and work on it. Chi, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Hey, Jackie, thanks for the great presentation. Awesome. That's a lot of information. That's a book altogether in there, in those pages. I have a specific question. The last page, you had mentioned on one line, being independent with some amount of help, right?
Yeah.
Specifically in college, for example, if, take for example, my daughter, she's 2 years out from college and we're thinking about, this transitioning phase and getting her to college. Early on in the years, when I wasn't really sure whether she would make it, I thought that I would have to be with her 100% of the time in college.
Yeah.
But it's looking like that's not the case, that her independence is growing. But my specific question is, what kind of help can you get for someone who does need some amount of help 2 or 3 days a week? What examples are there of something like that?
Yeah, Chi, I love that question. I think a lot of times that there are within the community, like let's say hypothetically, your daughter, it says like, I'm going out of state. I'm done with you guys. I'm going out of state, and
She's saying exactly that, actually.
Yeah, of course, So most schools have, for example, nursing schools tied to them. And you can say things like, you can call the nursing school, do you have a posting board? Because those students who are going to nursing school are interested in healthcare partnerships with patients, with individuals who have different healthcare conditions. And you can say, I would like to pay you to go 2 days a week to my daughter's dorm room. And you would have this conversation with your daughter. It would be, let's sort out what are the things, let's say hypothetically, she's just cleaning her room or getting her laundry done, or, self-care purchases, things like that. And say, let's pick a person, interview some people who are in nursing school this year, who can come and meet with you 3 times a week, just to make sure that you've been taking your medication as you're supposed to, just to make sure that your stuff is organized for your schoolwork, and just to make sure that you're up to date on your laundry. And that would be a person who is a checkpoint, and you would all agree together that you have their contact. You can, it doesn't have to be a fancy arrangement. You could pay an agency too, but the reality is, she probably would rather have some 20-year-old kid who's a couple years older than her doing it. And maybe they even become friends, and then that person's looking out for her extra for free.
Right. Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And we have some questions here, or questions and comments in the chat, so, or in the Q&A. And I fixed the chat for anyone that wants to type there. So April says, not a question, but just a special thanks to Jacqueline, an excellent presentation. So that's exciting.
Thanks, April.
Patty Robbie says, hi, Jackie, loved your talk. Do you have a list of technologies you recommended?
I am so, like, you just, my heart just, hi, Patty. It's so good to hear from you. It really is very personalized. So the answer is it depends, but if you are not sure what you need, that is where a referral to an occupational therapist is very helpful. So you don't need one, but they can help you sort it out. Patty, you should email me because I just need to catch up with you anyway. So I might have some ideas depending on what you're thinking of. But I think the key is if you have a sense of what you need, you can also look like, if you think Star Trek-y, like the idea of a recordable pen blows me away, like the Live Scribe that you can write on this paper and then it records and you tap the paper and then it starts playing the recording of what you were writing then. That feels like next generation level Star Trek stuff to me. So what I would suggest to you is if you think about what you need and then Google the thing, your solution. My mother did this. I can't even remember what it was about, but for something for my dad, and it came up. It was like, oh, so there's a thing that does that. So the trick is less worrying about picking the tech, it's pick the need and then Google the need and then see what pops up. There is often a solution in technology that it just shows up.
Wonderful. Okay, let's see, who else do we have here? This person just is anonymous. Great presentation. I know insurance does not always cover AT devices. Do you have any recommendations for parents, schools that cannot afford devices, or where to look for these options?
I do. MI-UCP is a local agency that offers assistive technology support, including AT Loan Fund, which is an amazing fund. And I don't know if Tracy can say anything about it.
I would love to do that. I actually want to share my screen with you all briefly because you are invited. Let me find the right screen. Of course, I don't know, just 1 second, and I'm going to put this up. Because we're inviting you to share with us some barriers to access in different parts of the state. We're going to have 4 different areas where we do a couple of listening sessions and then a long-term advisory for our new project, Close the Equity Divide. I will be, it's hard to do 2 things at once here. Let me just see if I can figure out, I've got it up on my, it's not showing me the thing I have open to share with you on my choices here. Shoot.
Do you want me to share the website services for AT Loan Fund?
Sure, go ahead and do that. And if you send an email, if you're in the UP, we're doing a meeting on Wednesday at 2 o'clock. We're going to do it virtually and in person in Marquette at the library. That's the invitation I was going to show you. But I can email you that if you contact us through the AT Tech email you see on our website, or you can email the email I put in the chat earlier, which is my email, and I will happily send you the notice for the upcoming presentation, our new program. We have other programs as well, and we help by helping you make a plan for how to obtain your assistive technology through either sources that we know are available that you can approach, or through some of our sources or borrowing methods would be the way that I would say that. So does anyone else have questions? Just trying to,
These are. And did you put the link for the AT
It's not on the website. I've emailed it and I have a copy of it and it's on our social media though. If you check MI-UCP, our Instagram or anything like that, you'll see the thing that for some reason, is not allowing me to.
Well, it's all the more reason to get on our social media for MI-UCP, get involved and get on our mailing list, because you'll hear about exciting things that come through our agency.
Absolutely. So just reach out there at the email at the top of the chat, my email or the email on our website under assistive technology, and I'll share those invitations for those upcoming meetings with you. Oh, and Christine wants to talk. So Christine, do you have a question? You can speak. Oh, you should be able to. Yeah, if you want to unmute yourself, Christine. Your hand is up. Do you want me? I'll try to unmute you. Oh, it won't let me. Okay, I can't quite figure out how to get that. Let me look through the other questions here and see in the Q&A. No, those have both been answered. So, all right. If we don't have any other questions, I need to let you know that December's AT talk has been canceled, and we are coming to you with the new series starting in January on the second Thursday. And we'll send out information in advance and a new link for that as we move forward. But we're spending the next the remainder of November and all of December doing these meetings, and you're welcome to attend those. And so please do check those out and take part. We would very much appreciate it. Anything else? Any other questions? All right. I'm having trouble seeing through. Do you see anything else, Lauren? Have you seen anything else in the chat? There's a lot of stuff in mine.
No, I think everything was covered.
Okay, lovely. Great. Well, thank you all for attending and taking part. And Dr. Jack, I just have to tell you, hit a lot of bells and whistles for me today, and advocacy things that we think about fairly regularly that now I think you've said those things out loud that sometimes don't get said out loud. So thank you very much. I think it was an incredible session.
Thank you so much for having me. And, you know, anybody's, you know what I could do is put my, I don't know how to, I guess the chat doesn't work, but my email is jakk@umich.edu. If you have follow-up questions to this talk, feel free to reach out. I have limits on, I'm not really supposed to do like individual stuff outside of my clinical setting, but if you have follow-up questions to this talk, I'm happy to answer questions as well offline. So
feel free to reach out to us too, and we can query of her maybe, or help you with resources we know about. So thank you all very much and have a wonderful rest of your day. Please attend one of our localized sessions coming up, and then plan the second Thursday in January to be right back here. Thank you.
thank you. Oh, sorry, wait, J Rez. Oh, he's off. If you're still on, it's jakk@umich.edu.
Lovely. It's good to have friends. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We'll see you in January, if not before. Bye-bye.
Take good care.
Bye.